The air in the Arizona territory tasted of dust and blood, a currency traded as freely as coin. For a lone woman like Helga Thompson, survival was a quiet war, waged daily against the sun and solitude. But when a dying Apache warrior collapses on her doorstep, his blood staining the thirsty earth, she is faced with a choice that will ignite a firestorm. To save him is a death sentence for the law. In this land, embodied by the relentless Marshal Silas Kane, offers no mercy for Indian sympathizers. This is the story of that choice, and how a single act of compassion forced a woman to become a fugitive, hunted by the law, but ultimately embraced by a tribe who would build her a home in the one place no white man was meant to see their sacred land. The dust storm came on, as it always did, a roiling brown monster swallowing the horizon. It was a Tuesday. Helga Thompson, a widow of 2 years whose world had shrunk to the size of her small, isolated homestead, was securing the last of the shutters. The wind, a hot, angry breath, tore at her calico dress and whipped strands of auburn hair across her face. Her husband, Jacob, had always said you could set your watch by the afternoon furies of the Sonoran desert. Now the wind's howl was just another voice in the profound silence of her life. Her homestead was a lonely speck in a vast, unforgiving landscape. 20 miles east lay the fledgling town of Redemption, a place she visited only twice a month for supplies, its name a bitter irony she had come to appreciate. To the west, the Dragoon Mountains clawed at the sky, their jagged peaks a rumored stronghold of the Chiricahua Apache. It was a land of harsh lines and stark contrasts, where life and death danced a tight, brutal tango. As the first thick waves of dust obscured the sun, turning the world a sickly ochre, she saw it, a shape stumbling through the maelstrom. Not a coyote, not a deer. It was a man. He moved with the lurching gait of the gravely wounded, one hand pressed tight against his side. His body a dark silhouette against the brown fury. Her first instinct, drilled into her by every tale of frontier survival, was to bolt the door and grab the Winchester rifle that leaned against the wall. The world outside that door was hostile, but something in his staggered, desperate progress held her fast. He wasn't running or raiding, he was dying. He made it to her small, hard-won patch of cultivated land before his legs finally gave out. He fell not with a cry, but with a silent, final surrendering to gravity, disappearing for a moment in the swirling dust. Helga's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. This was suicide. She knew it with a certainty that tasted like copper. Still, she unlatched the door, pulling her shawl tight over her nose and mouth, and stepped into the storm. The wind buffeted her, stinging her eyes with sand. She found him lying face down near her meager corn patch. With a strength born of desperation, she rolled him over. He was Apache. His long black hair was matted with dust and blood. A high cheekboned face, grim with pain, was smeared with dirt. His eyes, when they flickered open, were black, bottomless pools of defiance and agony. A dark, wet stain was spreading across the deerskin tunic on his left side, just below the ribs. He was young, no older than 25. He looked at her, his lips pulling back from his teeth in a snarl that was half pain, half pure hatred. He muttered something in his own tongue, a word that sounded like a curse. "I'm not—" She started, her voice raspy and thin against the wind. "I'm not going to hurt you." His eyes drifted shut. For a moment, she thought he was dead, but then a shallow, ragged breath shuddered through his frame. The choice was here. now. Not a theoretical debate in the safety of Redemption's church, but a living, bleeding reality on her land. To leave him was to let the storm or the buzzards finish the job. To take him in was to invite a different kind of predator, one that wore a tin star and carried a rope. She thought of Marshal Silas Kane, a man carved from the rock of the mountains themselves, his justice as unyielding and harsh as the midday sun. He had a reputation, a legend whispered in saloons and general stores. They said his family had been wiped out by an Apache raid near the Gila River Bend years ago. They said he hunted them not for justice anymore, but for vengeance. Sheltering an Apache, a wounded warrior no less, was a crime he would answer with a hanging, no trial needed. Her gaze fell on the man's wound. It was a bullet hole, angry and festering. Without help, he would be dead by morning. She had some skill with herbs and healing knowledge passed down from her mother. It was a quiet pride, her ability to mend and soothe. Could she stand here and watch a man die when she had the means to prevent it? The memory of Jacob's face, pale and still, after the cholera had taken him, flashed in her mind. The helplessness of it, the silence. "Damn it all," she whispered to the howling wind. It was not a choice, not for her. Dragging him was an ordeal. He was lean but dense with muscle, a dead weight that fought her every step of the way. The dust clogged her throat and blinded her. Finally, gasping and trembling, she pulled him over the threshold and slammed the door shut, plunging the small cabin into a dim, dusty twilight. He lay on her floor, a dangerous secret, staining her floorboards. For a long moment she just stood there, her breath coming in ragged sobs, the reality of her decision crashing down upon her. The storm outside was a tempest, but it was nothing compared to the one she had just unleashed upon herself. She lit a lantern, the yellow light casting long, dancing shadows. His face in the flickering glow seemed softer, younger. She fetched her medical supplies, a basin of precious water, clean cloths, carbolic acid, and a pouch of powdered yarrow to pack the wound. As she began to cut away the deerskin tunic, his eyes snapped open. His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist with a grip of shocking strength. The black eyes burned with a fire that had not yet been quenched. "Let go," she said, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hand. "I am trying to help you. You will die if I don't." He stared at her, his gaze searching her face, looking for the trick, the treachery he had been taught to expect. He saw no fear, only a weary determination. Slowly, agonizingly, his grip loosened. His hand fell away. It was a truce, a fragile acknowledgement in the heart of the storm. For the next hour, Helga worked with a focused intensity that blocked out all thought of Marshal Kane and the gallows. She cleaned the wound, her stomach churning at the sight of the torn flesh. The bullet was still inside him, lodged deep. She didn't have the tools or the skill to remove it. All she could do was clean the wound and pray that fever didn't take him. She packed the entry and exit wounds with yarrow and bound his torso tightly with clean linen. She made him a thin broth, but he refused it, turning his head away with a stoicism that was both infuriating and heartbreaking. He slipped into a state of semi-consciousness, his breathing shallow, his body radiating a dangerous heat. The fever was setting in. The storm outside eventually blew itself out, leaving behind a world scrubbed clean and unnaturally silent. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and violet. Helga sat in a chair beside the wounded man, the Winchester now resting across her lap. Every creak of the cabin, every distant cry of a nighthawk sent a jolt of fear through her. She was no longer just a widow. She was a harborer of a fugitive, an enemy of the state. Late that night, as she dozed fitfully, a voice startled her awake. It was a single word spoken in a dry, cracked whisper. English. Water. She was on her feet in an instant, ladling water from the bucket. She knelt and lifted his head, bringing the cup to his lips. He drank greedily, his throat working. When he was done, he slumped back, his eyes lucid for the first time. They held a question. "Why?" he rasped. Helga looked at this man, this Apache warrior, the sworn enemy of her people. She looked at his wound, the proof of the violent world that raged just outside her door. She thought of Jacob, of her own gnawing loneliness, of the simple, stubborn belief that a life was a life. "Because," she said softly, "leaving a man to die in a storm is no way to live." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then a flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod and closed his eyes, surrendering to the fevered sleep. Helga sat back down, the weight of the rifle in her lap, a cold, hard reminder of the price of her compassion. The night was long, and she knew with a chilling certainty that the hunt was coming. The town of Redemption smelled of stale beer, horse manure, and fear. It was a smell Marshal Silas Kane was intimately familiar with. He stood in the doorway of the marshal's office, a tall, gaunt figure silhouetted against the morning sun. His face was a road map of hard miles and harder sorrows, dominated by a pair of pale blue eyes that missed nothing and forgave less. He methodically rolled a cigarette, his movements precise and economical. "Anything?" he asked, not turning his head. Deputy Ben Carter, a young man whose face still held the soft uncertainty of youth, looked up from a wanted poster. "Just old Jedediah Stone, Marshal. Drunk again last night. Said he saw a ghost up by the Thompson widow's place during the storm." Kane lit his cigarette, the flare of the match illuminating the deep lines around his eyes. "Jed Stone's been seeing ghosts in a bottle for 10 years. Pay him no mind." He took a long drag, the smoke coiling from his lips. "But I am interested in the Thompson place. Storm was a bad one. Might ride out and check on her." Ben blinked. The marshal wasn't known for social calls. "You think she's in some kind of trouble?" Kane's gaze drifted west towards the distant hazy peaks of the Dragoon Mountains. "Trouble finds people out that far, Ben, one way or another." The trouble Kane was truly interested in had been reported 2 days prior. A small cavalry patrol had been ambushed near Apache Pass. 2 soldiers killed. The attackers had melted back into the mountains, but one they believed had been wounded. A Chiricahua warrior named Taza, known for his ferocity and for being the son of a respected war leader. A bounty had been placed on his head, but for Kane it was never about the money. It was about the ledger. And the ledger was stained deep with red. His hand unconsciously went to a small, worn leather pouch he wore around his neck, hidden beneath his shirt. Inside was a single tiny child's moccasin, a relic of a life burned to ash. The ride out to the Thompson homestead was hot and silent. Kane was flanked by Ben and 2 other men he'd deputized from the saloon, a grizzled tobacco-chewing tracker named Jedediah Stone, the same man Ben had mentioned, and a nervous, shifty-eyed ranch hand called Pete. Jed, despite his love for the bottle, had a reputation for being able to track a snake over bare rock. "What do you reckon, Jed?" Kane asked, his voice a low rumble. "Wounded man. 2 days old, in that storm." Jed spat a stream of tobacco juice. "If he was bad hit, he'd hole up." Find water, or he's buzzard meat. That storm would have wiped out most any trail. But he squinted at the ground. Wind blows one way, a man crawling for his life bleeds another. Sometimes you find a story the storm couldn't erase. As they neared the homestead, the place looked peaceful, almost serene. A thin curl of smoke rose from the chimney, but Kane's eyes were scanning, dissecting the scene. He saw the way the dirt was disturbed near the corn patch, a faint scuffing that the wind hadn't quite smoothed away. He saw the dark, rust-colored stain on the porch boards near the door, a stain someone had tried to scrub away. He dismounted his spurs, jingling softly, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet air. "Ben, you and Pete check the barn. Jed with me." Helga saw them coming. She'd been dreading this moment, playing it over and over in her mind until her nerves were raw. Her patient, whom she now knew was named Taza, after he'd spoken it in a moment of fevered delirium, was hidden. She had pulled up the floorboards beneath her bed, revealing a small, dusty crawl space meant for storing root vegetables. It was cramped and airless, but it was the only option. He was weak, the fever still clinging to him, but his will was iron. He had moved into the space without a word, his dark eyes communicating a grim understanding. She was outside feeding her chickens, feigning a calm she was nowhere near feeling when Kane's shadow fell over her. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was polite, but it had an edge like a newly sharpened blade. "Marshal Silas Kane. Just checking on the folks out this way after the storm." Helga forced a smile, her heart a frantic drum. "That's kind of you, Marshal. It was a bad one, but the cabin held. I was fortunate." Kane's pale eyes swept over her, then the cabin, then the ground. "Fortunate indeed. We're tracking a fugitive, an Apache. Killed 2 soldiers. We have reason to believe he came this way." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "You haven't seen anyone, have you?" "A man wounded. No one." Helga said, her voice a little too high. She cursed herself for it. "I've been here alone. Haven't seen a soul." Jed Stone, who had been circling the cabin like a vulture, stopped near the porch. He knelt, running a thumb over the dark stain she had scrubbed so desperately. He glanced at Kane, a flicker of something in his eyes, and then stood up, shaking his head. "Nothing, Marshal. Looks like she's telling the truth." Kane's eyes narrowed. It was a lie. A clear, deliberate lie from the best tracker in the territory. Kane looked from Jed's inscrutable face to Helga's, which was pale, with a poorly concealed terror. He knew. With the certainty of a predator sensing a wounded animal, he knew the Apache was here. But why had Jed lied for her? This was a twist Kane hadn't anticipated. It complicated things. A direct confrontation, tearing the place apart, might give the Apache a chance to fight, or it might force Jed's hand in some unpredictable way. Kane preferred control. He would play a different game. "Glad to hear it, ma'am," Kane said, his voice now smooth as honey. "Still, this is a dangerous man. We'll be setting up a patrol in this area for a few days, just to be safe." He tipped his hat. "You have a good day." As they rode away, Ben Carter looked confused. "Marshal, I thought you were sure." "I am." Kane cut him off, his voice cold. "She's lying, and also is Jed." He glanced back at the tracker, who rode a few paces behind his face, a mask of indifference. "The woman has him hidden. She's made her choice. Now we just watch. A woman alone needs water. She needs supplies. The Apache needs medicine. They will make a mistake, and when they do, we'll be there. Back in the cabin, Helga collapsed into a chair, her body trembling uncontrollably. She had survived the first test, but she had seen the look in Kane's eyes. He knew. He wasn't leaving. He was coiling like a rattlesnake in the shade, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That night, Tarza's fever broke. In the pre-dawn quiet, she helped him from the crawl space. He was weak, but his eyes were clear. He drank the broth she offered, his gaze fixed on her face. "They were here," he stated, not a question. "Yes, the marshal. His name is Kane." Tarza's face hardened at the name. It was a name known even among the Chiricahua. The Butcher of Gila River. "He will be back," Tarza said. "You are in danger. Because of me." "We are in danger," Helga corrected him. She looked out the window at the vast, star-dusted darkness. It no longer felt empty. It felt full of watching eyes. "You're not strong enough to travel yet." "I will be," he said, a promise in his tone. 2 days. Then I will go. I will lead them away from you." "And where will you go?" she asked. "You're one man against all of this, all of—" He looked toward the western mountains, a silhouette against the night sky. "To the stronghold," he said, his voice imbued with a reverence she had never heard before. "To the canyon of the whispering spirits. It is a sacred place. No white man has ever seen it and lived to speak of it." For 2 days, a tense, silent war of nerves was waged. Helga could feel Kane's presence like a physical pressure. She saw his men on distant ridges, small figures watching her every move. She rationed her water, trying to make it last, knowing a trip to the well would be scrutinized. On the second night, Tarza was on his feet. He moved with a stiff grace, the wound still a deep ache, but his strength was returning. He was ready. "I must go now," he said, standing by the door, "before the moon rises." Helga looked at him. In the past few days, a strange bond had formed between them. A bond of shared danger and unspoken understanding. Sending him out into the darkness felt like an amputation. "They are out there," she whispered. "They will see you." "I will be a shadow," he replied. He paused, his hand on the door latch. He turned to her, and for the first time his face was not that of a warrior, but of a man. "You saved my life. I will not forget this. My people will not forget this." Suddenly, a new terrible thought pierced Helga's fear. If they caught him, they would kill him. But if he escaped, Kane would turn his full vengeful fury on her. There was no scenario where she was safe. Her act of compassion had burned the bridge back to her old life. There was only forward, into the fire. "Wait," she said, her voice firm. An idea desperate and insane had taken root. "You can't outrun them in the open, but you know the land, the mountains. You said they wouldn't follow you into your sacred land." "They would not dare," he said. "They will if they're following me." She countered, her mind racing. "Kane thinks I'm a weak woman, a sympathizer he can break. He'll follow me. He'll be so focused on capturing me, the traitor, that he won't be expecting a trap." Tarza stared at her, comprehending the sheer audacity of her plan. "You would lead them into the mountains. It is a hard journey, a death sentence if you are caught." "Staying here is a death sentence," she shot back. She grabbed a sack and began throwing things into it. A canteen, a block of dried beef, the last of her bandages. "They are watching the homestead. They are not watching for 2 people, only one. Me. I will leave. I will make a trail so obvious a child could follow it. You will travel ahead unseen. A shadow, like you said. You will lead me to this canyon of the whispering spirits. When Cain and his men follow me, in your people will be waiting." It was a mad gamble, a plan spun from desperation and a thread of hope. Tarza watched her, a so dawning respect in his eyes. This was not the soft, frightened woman he had first encountered. This was someone who had been forged into something new in the crucible of fear. The marshal will not be merciful when he finds he has been tricked, he warned. Helga slung the sack over her shoulder and picked up the Winchester. She looked around the small cabin that had been her entire world. "Mercy left this land a long time ago, Tarza," she said, her voice devoid of any tremor. "Let's go." She slipped out the back door, melting into the darkness. A few hundred yards away, Tarza followed a silent, parallel ghost. The hunt had changed. The hunted were now leading the way. The journey into the Dragoon Mountains was a descent into a primal world. The terrain grew savage, a chaotic jumble of sun-scorched rock, thorny ocotillo, and skeletal saguaros that stood like silent sentinels. For Helga, every step was an agony. The civilized muscles of her former life screamed in protest. Her boots were torn. Her hands bloodied from scrambling over sharp granite, and the water in her canteen tasted of hot metal. She was the bait. Her trail was deliberately clumsy, a dropped piece of cloth here, a series of heavy, obvious footprints in a sandy wash there. She could feel Cain's pursuit like a physical presence at her back, a cold dread that urged her forward. Tarza remained a phantom. Sometimes she would catch a glimpse of him, a flicker of movement on a high ridge, a dislodged pebble that rolled down a cliff face. He was her unseen guide, leading her deeper into the heart of Apache territory. He would leave markers for her 3 stones, stacked in a particular way, a bent yucca leaf pointing the direction. At night he would leave a small bundle of edible roots or a dead rabbit for her to cook sustenance left by a ghost. On the 4th day, her body was failing. Dehydration was setting in, and a feverish despair began to cloud her mind. She collapsed in the meager shade of a juniper tree, the Winchester feeling as heavy as a coffin. This was it. She couldn't go on. Cain would find her, and the story would end here in this desolate canyon. As her eyes drifted shut, a shadow fell over her. She looked up, expecting the pale, merciless eyes of Silas Cain. Instead, it was Tarza. He knelt beside her, his face a mask of concern. He offered her a water skin. The water was cool and sweet, a miracle on her cracked lips. "You have done well," he said, his voice soft. "But you can go no further like this." "He's behind us," she rasped. "I can feel it." "I know. I have seen his scout, the one who chews tobacco," Tarza said, referring to Jed Stone. "They are a day behind. They move slow, cautious." He looked up at the towering rock walls that surrounded them. "We are close. The entrance to the stronghold is near, but you cannot enter it as you are. You must be welcomed." He helped her to her feet, and for the first time she leaned on him, her exhaustion overriding years of ingrained prejudice. They moved slowly, Tarza supporting her, until they reached a narrow, almost invisible fissure in the canyon wall, hidden by a thick growth of desert willow. "This is the way," he said. The passage was dark and cool. It twisted and turned, sloping downwards. The air changed, growing moist and fragrant with the smell of damp earth and unknown blossoms. The sound of the wind outside was replaced by a gentle, musical whispering that seemed to emanate from the very rock itself. It was an eerie, beautiful sound that soothed her ragged nerves. They emerged into a place that defied belief. It was a vast canyon, a world hidden within the mountains. A clear, spring-fed creek snaked through a meadow of impossible green grass. Waterfalls cascaded from high cliffs, feeding lush groves of cottonwood and sycamore trees. Small dome-shaped wickiups, the traditional homes of the Apache, were scattered throughout the valley, their smoke rising in lazy blue spirals into the pristine air. This was the Canyon of the Whispering Spirits, a sanctuary carved by nature and blessed by time. But the welcome was not what she had imagined. As they stepped into the light, figures emerged from the wickiups, warriors, their faces hard and suspicious, holding bows and rifles. Women and children peered out from behind them, their dark eyes wide with alarm. An old woman, with a face like a dried apple and eyes of startling wisdom, stepped forward. Her gaze fell on Helga, and her expression hardened. She spoke to Taza in the Apache tongue, her voice sharp and questioning. Taza replied, his tone respectful but firm. He gestured to Helga, then to the mountains behind them, explaining the situation. The old woman, whose name Helga would later learn, was Maeve, the tribe's elder, listened impassively. Her eyes, however, never left Helga. They were eyes that seemed to see right through her skin, weighing her soul. When Taza was finished, Maeve spoke a single word to the other warriors. Two of them stepped forward, and while not rough, firmly took Helga by the arms. They led her to a wickiup that stood slightly apart from the others. Inside, they gestured for her to sit. Taza was not allowed to enter. She was alone again, a prisoner in the very sanctuary she had sought. For a day and a night, she remained there. Women brought her food, a savory stew of venison and squash, and fresh water, but no one spoke to her. They looked at her with a mixture of curiosity, resentment, and fear. She was an outsider, a White Eyes, the face of the people who had stolen their lands and murdered their kin. Her presence here was a sacrilege. She learned later that Taza was arguing for her life in the Council of Elders. He spoke of her bravery, of how she had saved him, and then risked everything to lead their enemy into their lands. Others argued against him. To harbor a white woman was to invite disaster. Cain was a demon, and he would not be easily tricked. He would bring the full might of the U.S. Army down upon them. On the second day, Maeve entered her wickiup. The old woman sat across from her, her silence as heavy as a stone. Finally she spoke, her English accented, but clear. "The warrior Taza says you have a brave heart. I look at you, and I see the face of our enemy." "I am not your enemy," Helga said, her voice quiet. "I did not ask for any of this. I only did what I thought was right." "Right?" Maeve's laugh was a dry, rustling sound. "The white man's right has been a long, sharp knife in the belly of my people. You say you led the butcher Cain here, into our sacred home, a place no outsider has ever set foot. This was Taza's plan." "It was my plan," Helga stated. "Taza wanted to lead them away from my home. I knew they would kill him and then come for me. I knew the only way was to lead them into a place where you could fight on your own terms." Maeve studied her, her black eyes searching for any sign of deception. "You did this to save yourself." "I did this to save us both," Helga corrected. "My world was gone the moment I took him in. I chose this path. I only ask that you see the choice for what it is." Maeve was silent for a long time, the only sound the gentle whispering of the wind through the canyon. "Taza's wound," she said finally. "The fever is gone. The flesh is healing. This was your work." I did what I could, Helga said. You have the healer's hands, Maeve observed, but the heart, that is what we must see. The old woman stood. The council has decided. You will not be harmed. You will remain here. Tarza will prepare our warriors in the high passes. When Cain comes, the trap will be set, and we will see if your plan was born of courage or foolishness. Over the next few days, Helga's status slowly shifted. She was no longer a prisoner, but an uneasy guest. Under Maeve's watchful eye, she was put to work. She helped the women grind corn, gather herbs, and tend to the children. She learned their words for water and thank you. She saw the gentle, familial side of the people she had been taught to fear. She saw children laughing and playing mothers, singing lullabies, old men telling stories. It was a community, a family clinging to life in their hidden world. Her relationship with Tarza also changed. He was no longer just a patient or a guide. He sought her out in the evenings, and they would talk. He told her of his family, of his training as a warrior, of the spirits that inhabited the canyon. She in turn told him of Jacob, of her lonely life of the world outside the mountains. A deep and profound respect grew between them, a bridge built across a chasm of culture and conflict. One afternoon, as she was helping Maeve sort healing herbs, the old woman looked at her hands. You understand the plants, she said. You listen to them. It was the highest compliment she could have given. Helga felt a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years, not even in redemption. Here in this sacred canyon, surrounded by her supposed enemies, she was beginning to find a new kind of home. But the peace was fragile, a thin veil over a simmering threat. Scouts reported that Cain's posse was getting closer. They had found the narrow entrance to the canyon. They were coming. The whispering spirits of the canyon seemed to grow louder, more urgent, as if steeling themselves for the coming storm. Tarza and his warriors had prepared their positions, a deadly reception hidden among the rocks and cliffs of the entrance pass. The trap was set. The bait had worked. But Helga knew Silas Cain. He was not a man who walked blindly into anything. She felt a cold knot of fear in her stomach. There was a piece of the puzzle she was missing, a piece that could get them all killed. The piece Helga was missing was riding with the posse. Jedediah Stone was a man torn in two. His public persona was that of a drunken, reliable tracker who hated Apaches as much as any man in the territory. But his past held a secret, a debt he could never repay. 10 years earlier, lost in the desert with a broken leg and dying of thirst, he had been found by a small band of Chiricahua. They had not killed him. They had taken him to a hidden spring, tended his leg, and left him with enough food to get back to civilization. One of the Apaches who saved him was a young stoic warrior. He never learned his name, but he never forgot his face. Now, tracking that same tribe, his gut was a roiling pit of acid. He had lied to Cain at the homestead out of a flicker of that old debt, a desperate attempt to give the woman and the Apache a head start. But Cain's unwavering certainty had cornered him. To defy the marshal further was to sign his own death warrant. So Jed played his part, leading the posse with grim efficiency, his heart a leaden weight in his chest. As he led them to the hidden fissure in the rock, his internal conflict reached a fever pitch. He knew what lay beyond. He had never been to this specific sanctuary, but he knew of its existence from Apache tales, a sacred place. To lead Cain and his men in there was a profanity he wasn't sure he could live with. "This is it, Marshal," Jed said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "The trail goes in here. It's a tight squeeze. Easy place for an ambush." Cain dismounted, his pale eyes studying the entrance. Deputy Ben Carter looked nervous, his hand hovering over the butt of his pistol. "Marshal, maybe we should wait for the army. This feels wrong." "The army is clumsy, Ben." Kane said, his voice flat. "They'd lose them in these rocks. The woman and the Apache are in there. They think they're safe. We are going in. Jed, you take point. If you smell so much as a whiff of a trap, you sound off." The command was an iron glove. Jed knew he had no choice. But as he prepared to enter, he did something small. Something he hoped would be enough. He reached into his saddlebag for a plug of tobacco. As he did, he accidentally dropped his small, polished signal mirror. It fell to the ground, landing face up, positioned to catch the afternoon sun, and flash a bright, sharp glint of light towards the high cliffs overlooking the pass. It was a desperate, silent warning, a traitor's prayer. High above, one of Tarza's lookouts saw the flash. It wasn't part of their plan. He signaled to Tarza, who was positioned further down the pass. A warning. A signal from an enemy. Confusion rippled through the hidden warriors. As Kane's posse entered the narrow passage, the world went quiet. The air grew still and cool. The whispering of the canyon, which to Helga and the Apache was a spiritual presence, was to these men a menacing, unnatural sound that frayed their nerves. "I don't like this," Pete, the nervous ranch hand, whispered, his voice echoing off the walls. "Shut up and keep your eyes open," Kane hissed. They emerged into the canyon proper, the sudden expanse of green and the impossible beauty of the place stunning them into silence. It was a vision of paradise, but it felt deeply, fundamentally wrong. They were trespassers in a cathedral. "Spread out," Kane ordered, his voice low. "Find the wiki-ups. Find the woman. I want the Apache alive if possible. He has answers I need." Meanwhile, back in the main camp of the tribe, Helga was watching the entrance to the pass with Maeve. She saw the glint of light Jed had made. "What was that?" she asked. Maeve's old eyes narrowed. "A signal, but not ours." A sudden, chilling realization dawned on her. "They are not all coming through the pass. It is a diversion." She grabbed Helga's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Come with me. Tarza's trap is for the men we can see. But the true danger is the one we cannot." Maeve led Helga away from the main camp towards a series of smaller hidden caves, honeycombed into the canyon's northern wall, a place where the women and children were meant to hide. But Maeve didn't stop there. She climbed a steep, hidden trail that led to a high ledge overlooking the entire valley. From this vantage point, the terrible truth of Maeve's intuition became clear. While Kane, Ben, and Pete had entered through the main pass, drawing the attention of Tarza's warriors, two other figures were moving along the high northern ridge. They had taken a longer, more treacherous route, and were now positioned to flank the Apache warriors from above. One of them was Jed Stone. The other was a man Helga didn't recognize, a hired gun Kane must have brought. The signal flash had been from Jed, but not as a warning to the Apache. It was a signal to his partner on the ridge. The betrayal was deeper and more cunning than she could have imagined. Jed hadn't just led them here. He was an active part of Kane's strategy. His earlier lie at the homestead had been a masterful deception to make him seem untrustworthy to Kane's other men, ensuring no one would question his movements. Down below, the trap was sprung. Tarza and his warriors unleashed a volley of arrows from the cliffs. Pete, the nervous ranch hand, went down immediately, an arrow sprouting from his chest. Ben Carter scrambled for cover, firing his pistol wildly. Kane, cool as ice, ducked behind a large boulder, his rifle already barking back his shots precise and deadly. But just as the Apache warriors had the advantage, rifle fire erupted from the ridge above them. One of Taza's men cried out and fell from his perch. The trap had been turned. The hunters had become the hunted. Taza, realizing they were caught in a pincer, let out a sharp cry, a command to fall back to scatter and regroup. The carefully planned ambush dissolved into a chaotic skirmish. From their high ledge, Helga watched the scene with horror. Her plan, her audacious gamble, was falling apart, getting people killed. "We have to do something," she cried, turning to Maeve. Maeve's face was grim, but her eyes were clear. "The snake in the pass is dangerous, but the snake on the mountain is the one with the poison." She pointed to the ridge where Jed and the other gunman were firing down on her people. "Taza can handle the marshal, but he cannot fight the sky." Maeve looked at Helga, a final profound test in her gaze. "Taza taught you to shoot the white man's rifle?" she asked. Taza had in the past days shown Helga how to properly handle the Winchester, how to breathe, how to squeeze the trigger, not pull it. "Yes," Helga said, her voice trembling but firm. "Good," Maeve said. "A healer's hands must sometimes learn to fight to protect the lives they have saved." The old woman pointed to a narrow goat path that led from their ledge along the cliff face. "That path will take you behind them. They are focused on the battle below. They will not be watching their backs." It was an insane idea, to climb that path to face two armed men alone. But as Helga looked down at the chaos at Taza, fighting for his life at the people who had shown her kindness, she knew there was no other way. Her fear was a cold, hard knot inside her, but her resolve was hotter. She was no longer Helga Thompson, the lonely widow. She was a part of this canyon now, and she would not watch it burn. Clutching the Winchester, she nodded at Maeve. "Tell Taza, tell him I'm coming." She started along the path, her back pressed to the cold stone of the sacred canyon. She was no longer the bait. She was no longer the hunted. She was becoming the hunter. The goat path was a whisper of a ledge on a sheer cliff face. Below the canyon floor was a chaotic tapestry of gunfire smoke and desperate war cries. Helga didn't dare look down. She focused on the stone in front of her, her knuckles white on the stock of the Winchester. The whispering of the canyon seemed to rise around her, a chorus of ancient voices guiding her steps. This was her final test. Her fear had been burned away, leaving behind a cold, clear purpose. She reached the end of the path, which deposited her on the same high ridge as Jed and the hired gun. They were about 50 yards away, their backs to her, completely absorbed in firing down on Taza's scattered warriors. The hired gun was laughing a cruel, sharp sound that echoed in the canyon. Jed was silent, reloading his rifle with a grim efficiency that chilled her to the bone. Any hope she'd had that he was a reluctant participant vanished. He was a willing instrument of Kane's vengeance. She raised the Winchester, the butt heavy and solid against her shoulder. Taza's instructions played in her mind. Breathe out. Squeeze, don't think. She centered the iron sights on the hired gun, the one who was laughing. The world narrowed to that single point. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle's kick was a violent shove, the explosion deafening in the high, thin air. The laughing man jerked as if struck by lightning, his rifle clattering onto the rocks. He staggered for a moment, a look of pure shock on his face before toppling over the edge of the ridge without a sound. Jed Stone spun around his face a mask of disbelief. his eyes widening as he saw her. He had the face of a man who had seen a ghost rise from the grave. "You," he breathed. "It's over, Jed," Helga said, her voice steady and clear, carrying easily in the silence. She chambered another round, the shick of the action, a final deadly punctuation mark. Jed hesitated, his rifle half raised. In that split second, his betrayal, his debt, and his fear collided. But before he could make his choice, a dark shape rose from the rocks behind him. It was Taza. Having seen the flanking fire cease, he had scaled the cliff face with the speed and silence of a panther. Taza didn't kill Jed. He struck him at the base of the neck with the stock of his rifle. Jed crumpled to the ground unconscious. The threat from above was neutralized. Taza looked at Helga, his chest heaving, his face smudged with gunpowder. He glanced at the spot where the hired gun had fallen, then at the rifle in her hands. A deep, unreadable expression crossed his face, a mixture of awe, respect, and something more profound. He gave her a single, sharp nod. The battle was not over, but the tide had turned. Down below, the dynamic had shifted completely. Marshal Kane, now alone and exposed, realized his flanking maneuver had failed. Ben Carter, pinned down and terrified, was yelling for a retreat. Kane was a pragmatist above all else. His plan had failed. He would live to fight another day. "Fall back!" Kane roared, laying down covering fire as he and Ben scrambled back towards the narrow passage. The Apache warriors, led by a triumphant Taza, who had rejoined them, did not pursue. They let them go. The canyon had defended itself. A heavy silence descended, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the ever-present whispering of the wind. The battle had been short but brutal. The tribe had lost 2 warriors. Kane's posse was shattered. In the aftermath, Helga, guided by Maeve, became a healer in truth. She moved through the camp, her hands once soft and unused, to hardship now skillfully tending to wounds. She cleaned and dressed the injuries of the same warriors who had looked upon her with suspicion just days before. They now watched her with a quiet reverence. She had not only brought the fight to their home, but she had fought with them for them. She had bled figuratively for their survival. That evening, as the tribe mourned its dead, the Council of Elders met again. This time, Helga was not summoned as a prisoner, but as a guest of honor. She sat by the fire with Taza on one side and a solemn Maeve on the other. The chief, a stern man named Victorio, rose to speak. His eyes, which had been hard and unforgiving, now held a different light. "The white woman," he began, his voice echoing in the quiet canyon, "came to us as a fugitive. She brought the butcher Kane to our sacred home. This was a great risk, but she did not hide behind our warriors. She did not cower with the women. She took up a rifle and fought as one of us. She bled the enemy that bled us. The spirits of this canyon have spoken through her actions." He looked directly at Helga. "Our law says that no outsider who sees this place may leave. It is a law of survival. But you are no longer an outsider. You have a healer's spirit and a warrior's heart. You have earned your place among us." He then gestured to a spot a little way from the main camp on a gentle slope overlooking the creek. "We will build you a home here, a house of stone and wood to stand against the wind and the sun. You will have your own land, your own fire. You will be of the Chiricahua people, a sister to us for as long as you wish to stay." Tears welled in Helga's eyes. They were not tears of sorrow or fear, but of a profound, overwhelming sense of belonging. She had lost everything: her husband, her home, her old life. But here in this impossible place, she had found something new. A family, a purpose, a home. Over the next few weeks, the entire tribe worked to build her home. The men cut and shaped stones from the canyon walls. The women plastered the inside with adobe, making it smooth and cool. Tarza himself worked tirelessly, his strength and skill evident in every stone he laid. They built her a small, sturdy cabin, a fusion of settler design and Apache resilience. It was more than a house. It was a monument to her journey. She never saw Silas Kane again. Word trickled in from traders that he had returned to redemption, a broken man, his posse destroyed, his legend tarnished. He had been outsmarted and defeated not by a warrior, but by a lone woman he had underestimated. He left the territory, soon after disappearing into the vastness of the West, forever haunted by the ghost of the woman who had sheltered an Apache. Jedediah Stone was banished. The tribe, honoring Tarza's mercy, did not kill him. They took his weapons and his horse and pointed him east. He was cast out, a man, without a people, forever trapped between the two worlds he had tried to betray. Helga lived out her days in the canyon of the Whispering Spirits. She became a respected healer, her knowledge of settler medicine blending with Maeve's deep understanding of desert herbs. She remained a close friend and confidant to Tarza, their bond a quiet, powerful thread in the fabric of the tribe. She never forgot the world she had left behind, but she never longed for it. She had found her sanctuary, not in the false promise of a town named Redemption, but in the heart of a sacred land, in a home built by the very people she was once hunted for sheltering. She was a legend in her own right, the white woman of the stronghold. A testament to the fact that in the unforgiving heart of the Wild West, sometimes the most profound acts of defiance were simple acts of compassion. The line between civilization and savagery was never as clear as the maps suggested. It was a shifting, blurred boundary that ran through the heart of every person. Helga Thompson's story is a testament to that truth. She was an ordinary woman, pushed to extraordinary limits, who discovered that the greatest strength is not found in conforming to the world's harsh rules, but in daring to defy them. Her legacy wasn't written in history books or carved on a tombstone in a town cemetery. It was etched into the living memory of a people and built from the very stones of the sacred land that became her home. If her incredible journey from hunted fugitive to honored tribe member moved you, please take a moment to like this video and share it with others who appreciate tales of the true untamed West. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories of forgotten heroes and hidden histories. Thank you for listening.